This truly is, I think, the greatest title screen to any video game ever. I love this opening shot of the moon setting and dawn breaking over the land and Link riding his horse across the grassy field. It's so calming, so nostalgic. Anyway, hello, hi, I'm Jester of the Retro Stars. I'm going to be playing through Ocarina of Time and analyzing it as I go. I'll be looking at the gameplay and level design, as well as the narrative, symbolic, thematic, and spiritual elements of the experience. So really, you can think of this as part Let's Play, part very unstructured and chaotic video essay. So if you have any interest in hearing like a 12-hour info dump from some nerdy English teacher, then boy, are you in the right place. Hopefully that explanation is sufficient, and we can go ahead and jump in. So, when I first got this game, it came with the completed file of Chester already on it, and I think that's really charming. So Chester lives here, but we will be playing as Jester. And let's go ahead and dive into the analysis. So I'm not going to be reading the dialogue, but I will be narrating what happens. So just a little heads up about how this is going to work. So we open on a narration by the Great Deku Tree, who is the guardian spirit of Kokiri Forest. And he tells us about our protagonist, Link, who lives in the forest. And here we have this darkened shot of Link's treehouse. We're going to see him in his bed here. He's asleep, and he's having nightmares about this darkness that is rising over the land. Here he is. We can see the opened window behind him, the misty nighttime forest behind him, and he is having these premonitions about this rising evil. Here we can see these snapshots of his nightmare, where he's standing before this darkened drawbridge lit only by torches. You'd see the flashes of this horse riding past, this character that we don't yet know, but of course is Princess Zelda, and then we see this ominous figure on a horse standing before him, and Link with this awareness that he is evil, but we don't know what his deal is yet. That is our introduction to Link. So, the things to know about Link, starting off, is that he is having nightmares about something that is about to go wrong in the world, and he lives in Kokiri Forest, but he is not like the other Kokiri. So we'll talk about the Kokiri in a second. Right now, the Great Deku Tree is talking to Navi the fairy. He's telling Navi, hey, you need to go find Link. You need to bring him to me because he needs to go on this great adventure. It is time for him to leave Kokiri Forest and go out into the world and go on an adventure. Now, one thing to note about the Kokiri is that they're a race essentially of enchanted perpetual children who are watched over by guardian spirit fairies. They each have a fairy companion. Link is different because he does not have a fairy. So here the Deku Tree is saying, hey, it is time for the boy without a fairy to go on his journey. So this is essentially our inciting incident. The Deku Tree is calling Link to him to tell him about this quest that he needs to go on because there is something different about this boy, and we're going to talk about what it is. All right, this little scene here is fun because Ocarina of Time is the first 3D Zelda game, and it's of an era of games when 3D games are first starting to become the norm. And so here we're essentially showing off the 3D hardware in a really charming way. We have Navi flying through Kokiri Forest, showing off the environment that we're about to be able to explore. She's flying around, she says hello to the guy trying to pick up rocks, she slams her face on the gate here, has to fly around it, shake it off, wheel around into Link's house, and here we go. We're going to see that Link is still asleep. She's got to try and wake him up. Okay, so Link is not like the Kokiri. This matters because on some level, Link is our archetypal human being. Now, Ocarina of Time is essentially a modern myth. And what myths allow us to do is think poetically about our place in the universe. They get us to ask questions about, like, okay, what are we? Where do we come from? What is our purpose in life? How do we relate to the rest of the universe? We can see we're starting off with a particular answer to that question. because the Kokiri are this race of people who have this effortless connection to the natural world. On some level, they exist in what I would call an enchanted world. Here we go. Okay, our first scene of our first moment of actually engaging with the movement, with the gameplay of this game. We can walk around Link's treehouse. I like this moment as well because it's almost like a Wizard of Oz sort of moment, right? Wizard of Oz being one of, I think, the first movie in color, right? It starts out in black and white as Dorothy is in Kansas, and the second she walks out of her house into the land of Oz, suddenly she's awash in color. Here we have a similar thing. All the Zelda games up to this point have been in this two-dimensional perspective. And so we start out in that perspective, but the second that Link walks outside, suddenly we're introduced to Kokiri Forest and we are in 3 dimensions. Okay, so the thing about the Kokiri, they have this connection to the natural world and they live in an enchanted world. In an enchanted world, everything is imbued with spiritual significance. Every, like, especially the natural world, right? Every rock, stream, and tree has a spiritual element to it. We can see this by the fact that, like, the Kokiri live in this charming forest, right? It's very peaceful, it's very calm. You can look around and see, like, all of these pollen pieces floating around like golden dust motes. And the Kokiri are watched over by these spirits of nature that help protect them, right? So Saria here has her fairy. All of the Kokiri are watched over by the Great Deku Tree, who's their guardian spirit. Now, Link is not like them. He doesn't have this effortless connection to the natural world that they do. Up to this point, he has not had a fairy. And we can see this when we talk to Saria, where she's just surprised that a fairy has finally come to him. And she's like, now you're a true Kokiri, right? So there's this awareness that Link up to this point has not been like the rest of his companions in Kokiri Forest. Saria tells us that we've been summoned by the Deku Tree, so we're going to go see the Deku Tree. Now, in order to get to the Deku Tree, right now we are blocked off from doing so by this bully character. His name is Mido, and he's going to tell us we need to find a sword and shield. So that is our first task, is that we need to go find a sword and shield. And I like this first little challenge because it necessitates that we get used to the 3D controls before we actually head off into a world of danger. Okay, so Link is a bit of an outsider. He's not like the other Kokiri. He doesn't have this effortless connection to the natural world, and he has some sort of longing for something beyond the forest. If we see on his treehouse here, I want to go into the first-person view instead of talking to Navi. He is drawing chalk drawings of himself as a hero fighting a dragon. So he has this like desire to go on some sort of adventure beyond the forest. So he's a bit of an outsider in multiple respects, right? He senses that he doesn't belong here. In that sense, Kokiri Forest is interesting because it's not like the Garden of Eden. It's not this perfect reality that evil breaks in and destroys or something like that, right? Link already knows that this world is not perfect. He is an outsider and he is meant to leave it, right? He has this sense of alienation, which spurs him on this desire to go on some sort of quest. Now, I'm going to offer a couple of different ways of interpreting this idea of a quest. As I talk, we're going to sneak down here into this hole because the Kokiri sword is hidden in a chest through a maze down here. Okay, so several ways of reading this idea that Link needs to go on this quest. He's alienated from this world. He's not like the other Kokiri. We're going to find out that he is not even a Kokiri, he's actually a hylian, which are basically just pointy-eared humans in the Zelda universe. But anyway, I'm gonna offer 3 ways of interpreting this idea of the quest. So these 3 different readings. I've categorized them according to 3 words that all start with the same letter, as any obnoxious English teacher would want to do. There's a reading that has to do with the self, there's a reading that has to do with society, and there's a reading that has to do with spirituality. So for these 3 readings, I'm going to talk about what Kokiri Forest specifically means according to these 3 different levels of thinking about Link's quest. On the reading that has to do with the self, it's pretty common to read Ocarina of Time. We'll equip our sword here and cut this grass as we are looking for 40 rupees to buy a shield. Okay, it's pretty common to read Ocarina of Time as a metaphor for the tragedy of growing up. Right, there's this, it's pretty common to like think back on childhood with a certain nostalgia, right? It was a time when, at least for a lot of people, right? This is not a universal experience, but at least a common one, where people look back on their childhoods with a certain fondness and nostalgia, where it was like, okay, it was a time when life was simpler, when life was kinder, when you hadn't yet had to face the hardships that come with adulthood. So on that reading, Kokiri Forest represents this childhood, right? It is a kind place, it is a charming place, it is a peaceful place, and like obviously, right, we're surrounded by literal perpetual children. Oh, the rupee's stuck in the background, so I can't get it. This reading is discussed in a good video essay by Good Blood. It's called Ocarina of Time, a Masterclass in Subtext. I'm going to make a lot of references to that video essay over the course of this playthrough, but that's what we're thinking about Kokiri Forest representing on this reading, right? This is childhood. It is the safe haven that Link has to leave on his quest to become an adult. Okay, so that's the reading that has to do with the self. On the reading that has to do with society, we're going to talk about how a lot of Link's quest involves healing the wounds of the world, including the wounds across like social division and the alienation that people experience from the natural world. So this particular social reading, I think there are comparisons to be drawn between this type of reading and almost like a capital R romantic way of thinking about fantasy literature or medieval literature, right? You think of like British dudes in the 1800s looking back at classical literature or medieval literature and being like, okay, that literature describes a world that seems imbued with supernatural significance. Like everything seems to matter spiritually. And there's a concern that, and I think, and we're associating this with fantasy, I think in part because of people like Tolkien. I think Tolkien very much is a romantic thinker. Where the concern is that, okay, in the modern world, that sense of meaning, that sense of one's relationship to nature, that sense of like the sacramental meaning of the cosmos gets lost because of things like the Enlightenment or industrialization. Again, we see this very clearly in Tolkien. Okay, we have purchased our shield, so let's equip that. We have our means of attack and defense, and now we can make our way past the bully character who is going to be quite peeved, quite surprised, and a little bit jealous of us. Anyway, so on that reading, Kokiri Forest represents this idea of the lost enchantment of the world that we want to get back. The Romantics have a particular way of trying to get it back through things like engaging in poetry. There's going to be a little bit of that in Ocarina of Time. As we'll see, music plays a really interesting role. Other things like religious ritual are going to play an interesting role. Like if there's this sense of alienation from nature or from other meaningful parts of the cosmos, religion and liturgy are ways of bridging that divide, as we'll talk about here in a second. Which kind of brings me to the reading that has to do with spirituality. So on the spiritual reading, we can think of Link as a sort of existential wanderer. We have a stick. Okay, this actually supports this idea of Kokiri Forest being an enchanted world, because here, even the sticks matter. Even the sticks have some sort of significance. to our comprehensive understanding of the world here. We're going to just collect a few, as they will be useful once we get to our first challenge. Okay, Link is an existential wanderer. He essentially has this drive to understand the truth of things and to become integrated with that truth. And he stands in for thinking about, like, each of us as also existential wanderers as we are trying to understand and become integrated with the truth of things. So in that sense, Link is not just on this journey to become an adult, he's also on a journey to become a fully integrated, like fully spiritually integrated human being. So on that level of interpretation, Kokiri Forest is interesting because it seems to represent this, like, the fragile goodness of nature from which human beings are often locked out of and need to try and figure out how to reintegrate with. Basically, going back to thinking about Link as our archetypal human being, Ocarina of Time diagnoses the human problem as one of alienation. The prevailing metaphor of the game has to do with alienation from nature, but I think the alienation extends to, like, all meaningful aspects of human experience. We are consciously alienated from nature, and we have to figure out how to reintegrate with it. In that sense, okay, so the Deku Tree, I'm just talking over the Deku Tree's narration here. The Deku Tree is telling us that he has been cursed, and we need to enter into his roots and slay an evil creature within him that is part of the curse. And we'll talk more about his curse in a second. So this is our first foray into the dangers of the world. We are leaving the safety of Kokiri Forest on the start of our adventure. And Navi, our new companion, is going to help us out. Okay, so there are three, I would say 5 main races in the Zelda universe, 2 of which share in this understanding of the existential quest. However, 3 of them don't. The Kokiri, the Gorons, and the Zoras all have this effortless connection to nature, and in that sense we can think of them more as something like the Fae, or, as Good Blood points out, the Shinto idea of the kami than human beings in this mythic sense. The races who share in the existential quest are the Hylians, which is what Link is, we will find out, and the Gerudo, who we will talk about much later. We're going to need to talk about some potentially icky Orientalist stuff going on with them, but that should be a fun discussion. However, the Kokiri don't have this problem. The Kokiri have this connection to the forest. The Gorons they're basically rock people, and they have this effortless connection to the mountains and to fire. And the Zoras are fish people who have this effortless connection to the rivers. So Link is not like them, right? And that's how we are starting off this discussion of Link's existential quest. He has this existential dilemma, this cosmic quest that he needs to go on to become integrated with the cosmos that human beings are often disintegrated from. Okay, we have our map. Okay, good. So that is our fundamental problem, and that's kind of the mythic way we're thinking about human nature. So as we make our way through the Great Deku Tree, let's use the Great Deku Tree to think about what it is human beings in this world are locked out of. I mentioned that nature is the prevailing metaphor. So let's think about how Ocarina of Time is depicting nature. We've talked about how Ocarina of Time is depicting human beings. So now we'll talk about nature, and we'll also talk about the curse that is afflicting nature. Okay, now here is one of our first major enemies. We gotta use our shield to knock the Deku Nut back at him, and he is going to give us a hint about how to proceed through the dungeon. So these guys are nice. They're a nice little first challenge where you gotta have the ingenuity to use your shield, but then they also give you a hint about where to go next. Okay, so We don't know Link's backstory yet, but we're going to find out that Link is a refugee of war. He's a Hylian, but his mother fled from a war with him as a baby into Kokiri Forest and brought him before the Great Deku Tree, and the Great Deku Tree has essentially taken Link under his protection. So the way that we're depicting nature, I would say there's two aspects to the natural world here, and that the natural world has intention and the natural world is benevolent. So the Deku Tree has a will, a certain degree of consciousness, and the Deku Tree wills good things for human beings. So that's the way we're thinking about nature in the Zelda universe. That is worth mentioning because that is not necessarily an obvious way of thinking about the natural world. There are a lot of other mythologies that depict the natural world in different ways. For example, Babylonian mythology has the creation narrative of Marduk, the sky god, slaying the goddess Tiamat and building the cosmos out of her corpse. So we're presenting nature as this arena of violence that is not necessarily conducive to human flourishing. There's another story in Babylonian mythology, the Atrahasis, which is like the Babylonian version of the flood story, that talks about how the gods end up flooding the world because human beings are becoming overpopulated and getting really loud. And they so annoy the gods that the gods are like, well, let's just kill them all so then we don't have to listen to their racket, right? That's not very conducive to human flourishing. Okay, similarly, Greek mythology. In Greek mythology, the pantheon of gods are essentially personified forces of nature and of human psychology that don't care about human well-being, and in a lot of ways, human beings don't have any agency over the decisions of the gods. They're kind of at the mercy of these forces beyond their control. So that's another description of how, like, a universe in which nature does not care about human beings. Now, the Zelda universe is different than that, than this vision of the cosmos. It's more similar to the Shinto understanding, even though there's going to be some qualifying differences I'll talk about in a second. Now, in the Shinto understanding, the universe is inhabited by spiritual forces called the kami. They're basically gods that inhabit all aspects of reality, but they're not gods in the same way as like a Western understanding of things would think about gods. They're divine entities of some sort that inhabit all aspects of nature. Now, the kami are neither benevolent nor malevolent. They simply are, but we experience them as benevolent or malevolent depending on how we treat them, on our interactions with them. So Shinto is very big on one's reciprocal relationship to nature. A lot of Shinto rituals have to do with paying respects to the kami, offering food, that sort of thing, to establish a benevolent relationship with nature. Now, there's a lot of Shinto influence in Ocarina of Time, again, as the Good Blood video essay mentions, but there are some differences. While Shinto does emphasize nature as this place of like natural wonder and the sacred, this idea of reciprocity is interesting because, again, we are going to see that all throughout Ocarina of Time. But it's interesting to me that we don't actually necessarily start off with that idea. The idea that we start off with is that Link is taken in by a benevolent force of nature without having established any prior sense of reciprocal relationship or respect. Okay, let's shoot this spider dude. And we are going to jump down. There's a lot of spiders. There's a lot of spider webs all over the place here. And we need to jump down here onto this spider. Once again, I missed, and Navi's yelling at me. Oh no! And now I'm being attacked. You know what? Get over here. Okay. Yes, so... Right, so Link doesn't have to do anything. He doesn't have to perform any sort of ritual. Any sort of like Shinto ritual of respect, right? He simply is taken in by this force that seems to will his good. This is interesting because this isn't even universally the case in the rest of the Zelda universe, in the treatment of the forest. So we have Kokiri Forest, which we have already been introduced to. It's this charming, peaceful, enchanted world. But surrounding Kokiri Forest is the Lost Woods. Now, if a hylian wanders into the Lost Woods, that hylian will potentially turn into a Stalfos, which is this skeleton enemy that we're going to fight later on. So we have this understanding that, like, nature is not always benevolent, but for some reason, in Link's case, it simply starts out as benevolent. And I think there are some interesting reasons why this might be the case. That'll highlight the way we're thinking about the curse here in a second. Okay, we've already killed this spider. Now let's see if I cannot miss this jump. There we go. Amazing. Okay, let's fall down here into this nice turquoise pool. And we got more spider webs, which we can burn. We're discovering that we can burn them by pressing this button here to start this torch, which is good character, or good, not character design. Why did I say character design? Good level design, because we can see that there is some fire over here that we can burn with a torch. Okay, so why are we thinking of nature as benevolent specifically in Link's case? I think there are a couple potential reasons. One is that we're associating Link with the Kokiri. I mentioned that the Kokiri have this effortless connection to the natural world, right? So they don't need to establish this relationship of reciprocity with nature. They simply are part of nature. And Link, as growing up in that world, maybe has some aspect of the Kokiri way of being in his own person. That's going to be interesting because, of course, Link is not a Kokiri, he's a hylian, and he's going to enter the hylian world and, on some level, help deal with the hylian problem. So we're treating Link as this sort of in-between character who inhabits two worlds. And that's going to matter because he ends up becoming a sort of mediator between them. He's trying to heal this rift between nature and the human existential dilemma. Okay, let's press this button to make the water fall down. And we can hop onto the button here, or not the button, the platform here that looks like some moldy cheese. Okay, so that's one option. The other option is that we simply are making a statement about what nature is. And we are saying that nature is a place of potential meaning and potential love. Nature is a place of meaning because this is the arena in which Link senses his own existential quest. He feels the sense of alienation. He feels that he needs to do something about it. He's an outsider to this place, but he still sees that this place is good and worth protecting from the curse. So in that sense, nature is a place of meaning. There is meaning there to be discovered. Nature is also potentially a place of love, in that even if it might not always will human good, there is a sense in which it seems to participate in some form of like reciprocality, some form of beauty, some form of connection that we sense can be at least equated with love. Nature does seem to exist for Link's good, potentially will Link's good, and Link in turn can will the good of nature, as we will see. Okay, we got some more spiders. If that's how we're defining nature, then we can think about the curse of nature in a particular way. And here we're actually about to encounter part of the curse for the first time. These are Gohma larvae. As we'll see, we're going to kill the queen of these creatures. I love their sound effects. They're like skittery little noises, and their designs. I think on the very angular Nintendo 64 graphics, they look really cool. They're these weird little spider dudes. Another spider situation. Okay, we have plenty of Deku sticks. We are so fine on that in that regard. Okay, so the curse. Our main antagonist is Ganondorf. Link has seen him in his vision. We already have some sense of the fact that this guy exists. We don't know a lot about him yet, but he is there. He has come along and cursed the Great Deku Tree. Now, the way that we're thinking about the curse, there's two, actually, I'll say two ways of thinking about the curse, which I will call the Shinto interpretation and the Christian interpretation. On a Shinto interpretation, we're thinking about the curse as lack of reciprocity. So, like I mentioned, the kami are morally neutral, but if you don't respect the kami, then you get things like disease, like weather disasters, right? Like tsunamis, earthquakes, that sort of thing. So this is interesting because, as we are going to find out, Ganondorf does not have any sort of reciprocal understanding of, like, respect for the created order. He's all about gaining power for himself. He doesn't respect anything beyond himself. So this lack of reciprocity helps make sense of this idea of the curse. As we'll see, the Deku Tree is going to die, and the Deku Tree is also infested with these spider-like creatures called the Gohma. So that's one way of thinking about the curse. The other way is the Christian way, and I'm loosely calling this the Christian way because this is not specifically a Christian idea. And real quick, more spiders. These are gold skulltulas, and they drop these little tokens that I'm going to collect some of, and we'll talk about why. Basically, you can get certain items from them, but we'll talk about that later. There's one more up here. Okay, the idea that I'm going to talk about is not specifically a Christian idea, but it shows up a lot in like the Christian philosophical tradition, and that is the privation theory of evil. Basically, the privation theory of evil is that anything that exists, insofar as it exists, is good, but evil is actually a lack of existence. It is a lack of being, and in the, like, moral realm, it's a lack of love. Let's open this chest. I think it's just a heart, but I guess we need a heart, so that's nice. Okay, so I think this is a helpful way of thinking about the curse, because as we're going to see, Ganondorf definitely shows a lack of love, and his treatment of the cosmos that results in this curse actually does limit the being of the world around us. As we're going to see, the Deku Tree is going to die. It's going to, I guess he's going to succumb to the curse. And so we have this idea of, like, the enchanted world becoming disenchanted. The meaningful, loving spirits of the cosmos are fleeing, literally dying in this case, leaving only dead matter behind. So the world actually means less once Ganondorf gets a hold of it, right? So that's another way of thinking about the curse, is that Ganondorf destroys the natural meaning and the natural capacity to love in the cosmos. On that sense, the enemies that we're killing here, we can think of us destroying them as more like Link exercising evil spirits or healing a disease, rather than like killing some sort of positive aspect of nature. The monsters don't have a positive ontological status. They're a reflection of the lack of reciprocity or the lack of being that we're talking about. Okay, I've been rambling so much that we are already to the boss area. I had to hit these guys with my shield in the correct order, as one of the Deku scribes has told us. So we had to do 2, 3, 1. 23 is number 1. Having done so, we have the door opened to the first boss of this game. Now, this is such a cool moment. We come in, we don't know what's going on. Suddenly we have a cutscene and we're like, oh, something important is about to happen. It's this dark space covered in this eerie, kind of gloopy mist over the ground. The door closes behind us and it's so dark, and we can hear this rustling on the ceiling. And of course, this being the first 3D Zelda game, we know that we can slip into first person to look around, and we look up. We look up and we can see this glowing thing there. If we look at it and suddenly it zooms in on this eyeball that just rolls in the eye socket creepily, and then Gohma drops down from the ceiling, and here we have our first boss. It's such a good introduction. Okay, so we gotta shoot her in the eye. We gotta hit her in the eye just a bunch of times. She's a pretty easy boss, but I think a very atmospheric and cool, way of starting off this game. She is our first major challenge. Okay, we've got to shoot her while she's up on the ceiling here. Okay, so I've been rambling about, come on, there we go. I've been rambling about a lot of like spiritual ideas, a lot of metaphysics. Let me return briefly before we end this episode to the reading of Ocarina of Time as having to do with the self, thinking about Link's journey into adulthood. On this reading, the Deku Tree is a father figure, right? He is Link's only father that he knows. He's never known his actual father. He's never known his mother. She dies. The Deku Tree is Link's father. He's this guardian spirit of the Kokiri, which, represent childhood. The fact that he is about to die, then, is interesting, because that is going to obviously spur Link on to his quest. He is going to be forced to face the adult world. He has to leave the place of safety because the natural guardianship of this father figure is going to leave him, and that's going to spur him on his quest. Okay. We've talked about a lot. We've talked about Link's existential dilemma and cosmic quest. We've talked about the 3 different readings of Ocarina of Time that we will continue to discuss throughout this entire playthrough. And we've talked about the Zelda universe's understanding of nature, the natural world, as well as the curse and what it represents and how it works. Okay. I feel like I was drinking from a fire hose, but here we go. Next time we're going to talk to the Great Deku Tree, who's going to die, and then we will forge our way out into the greater land of Hyrule and see how Link commences to go on this existential quest to overcome human alienation. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you next time. Until then, bye.